Hello there. So let's start this tutorial by creating the backend, a Ruby on Rails application, basically with one model called person with a name and a phone as attributes. Let's create and migrate the database, and let's go ahead and see the database as well with some records. Let's paste the script behind the scenes like so, and let's see the database with a command, and let's go to the console and verify things. And now let's proceed to add an endpoint to the API. Now, because we're going to make some cross-origin resource requests, we're going to use this cool gem here, rack cores. So let's go ahead and paste it into our gem file, and let's bundle it. And let's paste this snippet of code into application.rb, basically to allow any origin to make a request to our server. The other gem that we're going to be using is called active model serializers, and it basically serves us to allow the creation of JSON representations of our models. So let's add it to the gem file and bundle it. The next step, of course, is create a serializer for the person model with a command, and let's open it and add the attributes we want serialized in the JSON object. Let's create the API endpoint itself, a controller namespace under API, and with a method named all. The controller itself, well, first let's just wrap it in a module, and let's add this method from the gem we're using that allows us to remove the root from any serialized JSON object. In the all method, let's just render all the records that correspond to the person model as JSON. Alright, let's test it. Let's run our server and let's use this little curl command to see if it's working. And yep, it's working. It renders the array of JSON objects. So for our Ionic app, we will create something very similar to what you see here, a list, except that we're going to populate it using the API that we created previously. Alright, so let's create the Ionic app using a command to create a blank app called agenda. Let's add to our Ionic application and platform that we're going to emulate, in this case iOS. Let's run our development environment with Ionic serve, and we can see that it works well in a browser window. So let's go ahead and open the application and go to the main HTML file index, and let's change something, and we can see that it changes and we can see things reflected via live reload. Now let's just copy this snippet of code here that basically renders the list that you see here to the right. Let's use the ng repeat angular directive to iterate over, in this case, a simple array of strings, and let's output it in this tag using an expression, a really simple expression here. So checking in our browser window, we can see that it works well. Let's create an Angular controller here, first creating the subdirectory for the controllers and then the controller itself. For this controller, let's first wrap everything in a closure, just to be aware of what the scope of the variables inside the controller will be. First, let's write the module for the controller itself and then the controller definition. For this controller, we'll use the HTTP and scope services. Let's add a variable to the scope that points to an array of strings. To actually use the controller, we need to declare it using a script tag in our main HTML file, like so. And we must not forget that we should also declare the module for the controller here in the dependencies for the app. Now we can actually bind the controller to this HTML tag, and we can go ahead and replace this iteration here with this code variable inside the controller, and we can see that it works well. A little reminder here, let's go back to the Ruby on Rails application. Let's check the routes.rb file, and we can see that we have here even running rake routes. Here's the route that we're going to hit using the controller that we created inside the Ionic app. Let's kickstart our Rails server and leave it ready for the incoming requests. Going back to our Angular controller, let's paste the string URL that represents the endpoint that we're going to hit in the Rails application. Let's also add the code that does the HTTP magic, like so. This snippet of code here makes heavy use of promises and basically has two blocks. One represents the success from the server, another represents failure. For this one, let's just basically add the response to the people's code variable. And now in our main view where the controller has been bound, we can actually iterate over the people code variable, which contains the array of serialized JSON objects. And since they're objects, we should use expressions to actually access each of the attributes properly, like so. Checking our browser window, we can see that it's working right. We are using the API to populate a list and create an example very similar to what you see here, but using data that's coming from a server. And so, last but not least, let's generate the iOS iPhone application. Let's build it and let's emulate it. This last command will launch the xcode iPhone emulator, like so, and here we go. The application we set on to build that uses a Ruby on Rails backend API. And this is it for this tutorial. I hope you liked it. If you did, let me know. Peace.